Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On Friday, Madrid will be celebrating the Night of Books. There will be many events all across the city, in libraries, bookshops, and public spaces to celebrate the joy of literature. This is why I have decided to devote this month's speech to books. There are many things that one can say about books, and therefore there are many speeches that one could write. But I've decided to speak about something that's been on my mind very often recently, and it is the power of books to change our mindsets and to change the world, potentially. I would like to start by telling you about a TED Talk video that I watched a few years ago. In this video, a woman called Anne Morgan talks about her reading project. Anne is a publisher or a journalist, I'm not quite sure, and she's from London. And she starts her TED Talk by saying that she had always thought that she was a cultured, cosmopolitan, and well-read person. But that one day, she had looked at her bookshelf in her apartment, and she had realized that most of her books had been written by American or British authors, and that very few of the books that she had were translations from other languages. Now, this was not entirely Anne's fault, because in the UK, only about 4.5% of all the books that are published in a given year are translations from other languages. And even those who are always originally from the same bunch of countries, like France or Germany. When I watched this video, I thought, oh my goodness, am I in the same situation? I also thought of myself as a well-read and cultured person, but were was my book collection the same as Anne's? It wasn't as serious because Spain is a bit different from the UK and lots of translations are published every year. In fact, I think that Spanish readers read translations more often than they read books that have been originally written in Spanish. Anyway, in this video, Anne goes on to tell about her project, because she was so shocked by this discovery that she decided that she would devote the following year, which was 2012, to reading one book from every country in the world. That was 196 books in 51 weeks. If you're interested to know how it went, I recommend you watch her video, because she tells very interesting stories about what she learned during this project and how far people were ready to go to help her in this project. But this is not the point of my speech. When I watched this and I learned Anne Morgan's story, I found it very inspiring, and I said, I'm going to do the same. But obviously, I couldn't do it in 1 year. I am realistic and also very lazy, so I knew that I could not possibly read 196 books in one year, especially considering the fact that I was in the middle of my MA in conference interpreting. So I decided to take it little by little, and I decided to include new authors, especially from countries that I had never read about, in my daily reading. The first problem that I came across is that my local library had shelves that were quite similar to the shelves that Anne Morgan had in her apartment. That is, most of the books were written by Spanish-speaking authors or English-speaking authors, mainly from Europe and the Western world in general. If you were to go to your local library or to your local bookshop on your high street and you picked a book at random from a shelf, I guarantee that it is very likely that that book would be written by a white, Western, probably Anglo-Saxon man. So picking books at random was really not the way to go. And I realized that I needed to make a conscious choice every time I went to the bookshop or the library to pick a book out of my comfort zone. It is more comfortable, it is easier to read books by authors who share your values and who have the same cultural background as you do. So this is why I'm speaking of stepping outside your comfort zone. Ever since I started doing this about 3 years ago, I have learned many, many things. For example, I have learned about the suffocating bureaucracy in Egypt. I have read the love story of a woman from Belgium and a man from Togo. I have read the story of a very poor sari seller, which is at the same time the story of a very opulent family who can buy silk saris by the dozen. I have read about warriors and princes from Ghana, and not from a colonial perspective. And I have also read very bad books, I'm afraid. When I was in India, I bought a book by a best-selling Indian author, and it was probably the worst book that I have ever read. It was the story of a young Indian woman who apparently had it all. She had a great job in a multinational company, she was smart, she was pretty, and her main problem was that her mother wanted her to get married. So in the end, she gives in and she decides to marry a man that's approved by her family. But as the two families get together in a luxury hotel complex, all her ex-boyfriends come back to her and realize that they made a great mistake in breaking up with her, and they all of them ask her to marry them instead. Anyway, it was a terrible book that I probably would have never read if I were not stuck on a train for 6 hours. But there was a good side to it, because if this is a best-selling author or a best-selling book in India, I think it's worthwhile knowing why. And even if it's a bit like a soap opera, it is also a story of female empowerment, of sex and independence in the working life, which I guess is not all that common. Anyway, back to the project. At first, I had a kind of checklist mentality. I wanted to read more books from more countries, start crossing out new continents that I had never read books from. But then I realized that it didn't really matter, because I learned something more important than that. If you remember, the start of my speech and the start of Anne Morgan's speech was, I thought I was a cultured person, a well-read and cosmopolitan person, but all of my books were basically written by British and American authors. In spite of this big but that I've put between my two phrases, there is no real contradiction between them in our society. You can be cultured and only read European authors. You can be cosmopolitan and never have read an African author, for example. In our society, being cultured, being well-read, means having read your Hemingway and your Dickens. It means knowing your Shakespeare from your Cervantes. It means knowing that to be or not to be, knowing that to be or not to be is a quote from Hamlet. It does not mean, being cultured, that you should know about the struggles of a farmer in China in the years leading up to the Cultural Revolution. It does not mean understanding the problems that Black women go through when they try to imitate white or Western beauty standards. And why? Why do we have this double standard? Why do some things belong to culture while others are left outside? I will tell you another story. I have a friend who is embarked on his very own reading project. He's trying to read a book collection called Millennium Jewels. Perhaps you know it because it was published by a major Spanish newspaper. It's a collection of 100 books, apparently the best books of the past millennium, the books that everyone must have read and that everyone must have in their bookshelf. In total, un momento. Sorry. As I was saying, it's a collection of 100 books, the classics, the books that everyone should have read by now, I guess. We had a look together at this collection, my friend and I. Here's the tally. I don't think you can see it. But out of the 100 books, 93 were written by men, and only 7 were written by women. Out of the 100 books, 89 were written by North American or European authors, 89. 10 were written by South American authors, so in Spanish, and only one book out of the 100 was written by an African author, only 1%. As you will have noticed, there are no books by Asian authors, there are no books by Black people, for example, and there are no books by non-Western women. The 7 women who are part of this collection are all European or North American. Is this collection of Millennium Jewels representative of the world we live in? Clearly not. But it is representative of what we know as culture and what we know as the classics that everyone must read. It reminds me of a joke that perhaps you have seen because it was making the rounds on the internet for a very long time. It's another tally. There are 2 columns. One of the columns is Earth, and the other column is rest of the universe. And it's a joke about the Miss Universe beauty pageant, the beauty contest. Of course, all the contests have been won by a representative of planet Earth, Miss America, Miss Venezuela, Miss France, whatever. And at the bottom of the tally, it says, rest of the universe, are you even trying? And my point is, Asians, are you even trying to write the next book of the millennium? Non-Western women, are you even trying? Of course they're trying. But the point is that there's someone who decides what's a millennium jewel and what isn't, and that is people in power. Of course, I'm not saying that all the books in this collection are the same. Each of them has a unique contribution to world literature, I'm sure. But the thing is that we're often reading the same story over and over again. And this brings me to another TED Talk video that I wanted to mention. It's by that very wise woman called Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and it's called The Danger of a Single Story. The single story that she refers to is that is told to us in literature or in the media. For example, the single story of women for many centuries has been that women should stay home, that they should be seduced and cared for. The single story of Africans in the media has been for many years that they're poor, that they starve, that they live in war-torn countries, and it doesn't really matter which country they're from, because they're all the same, and Africa is kind of like a country, right? The single story about refugees that we read in Europe is that they come in waves, and that they bring everything, from disease to radicalization and terrorism. The problem with these stories is that identity is manifold, and that it can never be reduced to a single story. I'm sure none of you would be happy if I summed up your life into one story. Like, oh yeah, that's the interpreter. That's the girl who once, I don't know, fell flat on her bum at a party. That's not fair. So it's not fair to reduce anyone's story to just one line, one story. The problem is that not everyone has the chance to tell their full story. Because as I said just a minute ago, it is people in power, it is power, who decides what story we tell, how we tell it, who gets to tell it, how often we tell it, and which stories deserve to be millennium jewels in literature. The result of this abundance of simplistic stories is that we focus on what makes us different and not on the similarities between us. And this, focusing on differences, leads to racism, xenophobia, and a general lack of understanding between different people. The thing is, how do we fight this? Well, my suggestion, as you might imagine, is just read. Open your mind, read more widely, read the world, like Anne Morgan did. Try to go outside your comfort zone. Try to read books from different countries by people who are different from you, by people who have different backgrounds. I know that if you read one book by one Nigerian author, you will not know everything about Nigeria, obviously. I would be lying through my teeth if I said that, and I would be contradicting everything that I said in this speech. But even if you read one book by one Nigerian author, that will be better than reading no book by any Nigerian author. So I guarantee that if you read just a bunch of books outside your comfort zone, you will start soon, very soon, questioning everything that you know about the world.